Assalamu alaikum, everybody. May I have your attention, please? I request you to please be seated so that we can start it formally. I would request my IT team to start in the name of God. We will have a few verses from the Holy Quran, please.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ هُوَ الْأَبْتَرُ.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I am Saddam Hussain, your host for the evening. On behalf of the World Bank and Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, I welcome you all to the launch of Pakistan Development Update. As we convene, it is with sober recognition of the challenges that lie ahead: low foreign reserves, soaring inflation rates, and a landscape fraught with uncertainties. Yet within this mosaic of complexity, there exists an opportunity for informed discourse and strategic action. At the forefront of our agenda, as I mentioned earlier, is Pakistan Development Update, a seminal report meticulously crafted to navigate us through what is wrong and what needs to be done. The gathering today represents a collaborative effort between Pakistan Institute of Development Economics and the World Bank. Well, we agree on a few things and do not agree on a lot of things. Yet the common urge to push for reforms in order to put the house in order, followed by economic growth and development, is the convergence point that brings us together each time. Yesterday, we presented immediate reform agenda to put the country on the right track in a few weeks' time, and we are here today presenting the World Bank report, Pakistan Development Update, with a special focus on state-owned enterprises, the enigma of state-owned enterprises. The concern is that elephant in the room is getting bigger and bigger, and the room is just vanishing into thin air. Let me stop here, let the World Bank team present you the details of it. What I would do is to run you down through today's agenda. So we'll just start with the opening remarks of Country Director World Bank, Najib bin Hassin, followed by a keynote address by Ijaz Nabi, Country Director IGC. Then we have two brief presentations by the World Bank team on macro and fiscal situation, and then the impact of state-owned enterprises on the economy, followed by a Q&A session. Afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion on the report, specifically state-owned enterprises. And then we will have a question and answer session again. Let me tell you that we'll have the questions through the Slido application. You will have the QR codes placed at your table, or you can just log into the Slido and write the question. Those will be shared here. We will not be taking the question in person. So put your question through Slido. We will show it here and we will answer these. And then we will close at iftar. So to start with, I'll welcome the Country Director World Bank, Najib bin Hassin, to come on stage and open the session formally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. So in my country, in an hour and a half, 2 hours before iftar, we usually play football. And I find it very brave to see a full room 2 hours before iftar to hear about macroeconomic projections. But it will be exciting, so time will go fast. I'd like to thank the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics for one more instance of excellent collaboration and for the work they're doing. Yesterday they published their Islaah document with bold recommendations to the new government. So I encourage you to read that as well, in addition to our report today. I'll be quick, and I'd like to contrast a little bit the very gloomy picture that Saddam just mentioned about the state of the economy by taking you back 12 months ago when you produced the previous issue. in April 2023, things were extremely difficult. We all know that Pakistan was on the brink of a crisis. Things where the situation was extremely hard. We have 1.7 months of forex reserves today. It's not high, it's insufficient, it's low. We were at 0.7. We were at a few weeks a year ago. Even inflation was higher, and a combination of shocks had brought Pakistan economy to that situation. Inadequate macroeconomic decisions, macroeconomic management, including on the exchange rate side, surging world commodity prices, so external shocks, global monetary tightening, external shock as well, which led to also increase of the cost of debt and service, the floods of 2022, which led to economic contraction, and a lot of policy uncertainty. And 1 year has passed. In the meantime, there has been a start of return to stability with a standby agreement with the IMF that was signed in July, and the second review just had a staff-level agreement, and this is hopefully the expectation that the IMF board will approve it and we'll have a successful SBA. There's better economic management. The program has been implemented. The exchange rate has stabilized. It was a good agricultural year, so we have a start of return to stability. Now the question, and that's the object of this report today, it's a biannual report on the state of the economy, which we publish before the meetings of the IMF and the World Bank that are starting in 2 weeks, is basically makes the point that we are at the start of the recovery, and of course this recovery will not be sustainable to achieve a stronger recovery and long-term sustainable growth, because while some stabilization has been achieved, we're still predicting a growth rate of 1.8% in the current fiscal year, and slow growth even in the next and following year, unless major reforms on the fiscal side and all what affects the fiscal picture are engaged, including in the energy sector, are engaged quickly through a credible, ambitious, well-communicated plan that combines fiscal measures, energy reforms, openness to investment, all of these to restore investor confidence and restore to put the country back on a more promising fiscal trajectory, which will prepare the ground for a stronger, more sustained growth recovery. And therefore, the challenge today, this is a key moment for the country, there's a new government, is whether the plan of reforms, its engagement, will be sustained and will be credible enough to restore this confidence and restore macroeconomic balance and to initiate a stronger growth trajectory. I haven't talked about the exchange rate. It has been stable, but at a cost of constrained imports, which is hurting growth itself. Without taking more time, I have long talking points, but I would like the authors of the report to have the time to present these results. We'll have my colleague Murtaza, who's the main author of the report. He will present the outlook, the picture on the macro over the coming 2 years in particular, and then my colleague Qorat Al-Ain will present the special focus of this edition of the report. Every report we have a special focus, and this time the focus is on federal state-owned enterprises and how do they contribute or not to improving or worsening the fiscal situation and what should be done about it. And she'll show you interesting numbers. But before that, I would like to invite my friend, Dr. Ijaz Nabi, who's the country director of the International Growth Center, to make opening remarks. And while he comes on stage, I'd like to encourage you all to read his latest paper with Farooq Iqbal, which looks at borrowing from the government of Pakistan and some sort of Dutch disease that he and Farooq claim the country is subject to, and that lending from multilaterals included contribute to. So thank you, Ijaz, for making it today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Naji. The mic works. I'm sorry, I pulled up a chair. I injured my knee recently, and I may need to sit down, in which case it's good to have it. This is such a good update and so succinct that having long opening remarks, especially 2 hours before Iftari, doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I thought I'd be very, very quick and just raise a couple of my pet themes. First of all, on updates, the World Bank didn't do updates till the East Asia economic crisis till the East Asia financial crisis, and that's when the update started. But they used to be very brief, and we were required actually to do the updates almost every month. I was then at the World Bank. And we need to capture somehow that there is some economic activity going on in a doom and gloom scenario. So we collected the polls that were paid by people when they got onto the road, the poll tax. And that gives us some inkling of what the economic activity was. So just to give you an idea that the updates then were very much, on the dot, do this thing quickly, we need to see some results. But this update actually goes and talks about state-owned enterprises, which is an important part of the larger fiscal story. So let me context my remarks in the larger problem as I see it. Well, first of all, the political economy context in Pakistan is extremely important. We had an election recently, and the election results are very clear. People want change. And I see that change as expressing itself in two aspects. One is people want stabilization. They want to get out of this rut of frequent macroeconomic crises. And the second thing they want is growth that integrates them with the rest of the world. And I'm speaking of a lot of young people who came out to vote in very large numbers. To me, as an economist, that translates into managing the fiscal deficit, which is the central cause of the destabilization that we face. And number two, doing something about our collapsing exports. Because it is through exports that we will connect a large number of our young people to the world economy. They do it themselves through migrating to the Middle East to work. But that's quite different from being integrated with the world by working with world technologies, by working with world capital, and by exporting services and products directly. So that's what I'm talking about when I say that the mandate to me is very clear of the political change that people want, which is stabilize the economy and do something about integrating the economy with the rest of the world. Now, what does it mean to someone like me when I see people asking for stabilization? I go straight to the fiscal deficit. So if we can start, I have 2 or 3 slides that I'll go through. If we could have...
This one is next, sir.
So all fiscal deficits are not the same. And I'm contrasting India's fiscal deficit with Pakistan. If you see on the left side is the fiscal deficit, and you can see that India's fiscal deficit is actually considerably higher than Pakistan's for many years. And yet, India's fiscal deficit does not translate into a current account deficit the way Pakistan's does. That's one thing, that's the most important thing to remember. Not all fiscal deficits are bad, but ours has been very bad. And the reason why it's been very bad is because we spend most of the budget on consumption. Not only the resources that we raise ourselves, but importantly, what we borrow from abroad as well. goes largely into consumption. And that's also because our savings are very low. Again, if you compare our savings with India and Bangladesh now, it's half. That translates into very low investments, half India and Bangladesh's. And what the fiscal deficit does, that on the one hand, you've got very little investment going on, both public and private investment. So you're not creating crowding in of private investment to support growth. But on the other, in order to plug the fiscal deficits to meet short-term requirements of an IMF program, we will tax exports. We tax exports in two ways. One, through overvaluation of the exchange rate, and two, through direct taxation because of the delays and duty drawbacks for exporters. This is not a great environment to realize the mandate that people have given us in this election, which is stabilize, control the fiscal deficit to stabilize, and integrate us with the world economy through raising exports. So what the papers that Naji referred to, I'm also associated with the Consortium for Development Research in Lahore. And these papers actually, there are two papers. One is on how what Pakistan has done with external borrowings. And these are largely concessionary, it's largely concessionary debt. And what we've seen is that it has fed into consumption, which is what I said earlier. And because of very little fiscal headroom, we have not used the revenues in order to do what needs to be done to get the exports going, both in terms of human development, also basic infrastructure. We've even failed to integrate with the CPEC initiative in order to get some boost for the exports. So there's a long list of things that need to be done to correct both. This is not the time for me to go into those. State-owned enterprises is clearly one of those, because the energy sector and the others together eat up large volumes of subsidies, and that ends up with a large fiscal deficit, and a lot of borrowing goes to support that. So there's a long list of things that need to be done to address that. There's also a long list of things that needs to be done to address the export side. Exchange rate, maintaining a competitive exchange rate, keeping fiscal headroom to support exports, human development, and importantly, climate change. So one can have an excellent growth strategy, which is forward-looking, but which gets a start from the stabilization efforts. So I see no trade-off between stabilization and export-led growth. I think the reforms that need to be done to stabilize will also help generate exports. So I don't see any conflict. So to me, it's a long, persistent policy reform that will be required. And the objective of that reform will centrally be to shift the focus of the economy. What has happened is that large number of enterprises and potential investors and Pakistani entrepreneurs, they are now fixated on drawing rents from a $30 billion economy, $35 billion if you include concessionary finance from organizations such as the World Bank. They are focused on how they can get rents from the $35 billion economy. What we need to do is to shift the focus away to the world economy, which is a much larger economy, where the potential for profit making is massive, given that we have a large labor force. If we train it, and if we give it the education that it needs, the same entrepreneurs will enjoy much larger returns in the world economy. I don't like the term elite capture, because there's always elite capture. I think it's a question of looking at the short-term costs in return from longer-term rewards. It's really that needs to be communicated, that needs to be discussed, And that needs to be part of the policy reform work that the World Bank and other organizations do. Now, let me give you an anecdote before I conclude. I used to work on Malaysia, and the bank didn't have a large lending program to Malaysia. I'm talking about the mid to late 90s. The bank didn't have a large lending program to Malaysia. Their borrowing fell below 300 million. We used to do one major economic report for Malaysia every year. And that report was used by the government as part of its budget speech, as part of the annual plan, as part of the medium-term plan. So they used that work a lot. So that particular year, their borrowing fell below 300 million. And my program director said, next time you go, please tell them there will not be a report next year. Now, there's supposed to be no link between lending and analytical work, which is exactly what the Malaysians told me. And then they said, look, come back, we'll discuss the next day. I went there and they said, how much should we borrow so we continue to get these reports? In Pakistan, that's almost never the case. You've done some terrific reports. I teach, part of what I do is teach at LUMS these days. My seniors who I teach, they know your productivity report far better than anybody in the government does. The World Bank has done a fantastic report on climate change. I'd like to know what the government ownership of that report is. And it's precisely by cultivating that ownership that we will be able to put these external resources that we get to much better use than just consumption. I know I was in the bank when the bank shifted towards budget support lending. The idea behind budget support lending is very, very good. We should let the countries do their own. We should let the countries do their own thinking, their own strategizing. We should just finance. In essence, a great idea. But when countries have a political economy in which you don't really pursue reform very seriously, you've got to rethink this instrument. And this was one of the central arguments of the paper that Naji talked about. With that, Naji, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Ijaz Nabi. And now we have two presentations by the World Bank team, one on macro and fiscal update, and second on special focus section, which is basically about the fiscal impact of federal SOEs, state-owned enterprises. I would invite Syed Murtaza Muzaffari to present his study. If you could come on stage. Before that, I would like to inform you that it will be followed another presentation, and then you will have a Q&A session. Again, the Slido thing which I mentioned, you have to put your question onto the Slido. A QR code is placed on your tables, or just log into the Slido and put your question there. So now we will listen to the two presentations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am pleased to provide you with an update on the recent macroeconomic developments of Pakistan and present our medium-term outlook. Can I go to the presentation? Thank you. So I start briefly by walking you through the key messages of the report. After contracting by 0.2% last year, Pakistan's economy has been stabilizing and is showing early signs of a recovery. However, the current recovery is neither sustainable nor sufficient. It's not sustainable because the economic vulnerabilities have remained high. And it's not sufficient because the current muted growth doesn't help the growing population of Pakistan to improve living conditions, and also to reduce poverty. But Pakistan could escape its current low and unsustainable growth path by implementing bold reforms. Pakistan's economy was in a very difficult economic situation in fiscal year 23 with massive economic imbalances. Amid rising inflation and a rapidly depreciating rupee, the foreign exchange reserve was falling. And at that time, import management measures and capital controls were imposed that disrupted the supply chain and weakened the confidence. As you see, the current account deficit sharply improved from a deficit of 3.6 billion to a surplus of 1.4 billion in the first half of the year. These impacted the confidence and also the economic activities. Coupled with the floods that we had earlier that year, industry and services economic activities declined, and that impacted the overall growth, which contracted in the second half of the year. Since last July, however, the situation has substantially improved. Continued tight macroeconomic policies under the IMF SBA program and fresh external inflows has helped to avert the short-term risk to macroeconomic stability, while a strong recovery of the agriculture sector has helped to improve the economic growth. As you see, since then, the rupee has been stabilized and the position of the foreign exchange reserve has improved. Despite the stabilization and recovery, the overall economic vulnerabilities have remained high. Interest costs has been high, which resulted in a sharp increase in fiscal deficit. As you see, it has gone up from 2.5 billion to 4.2 billion. And at the same time, the commercial banks have been heavily relying on the liquidity injected through OMOs to meet the financing needs of the government. At the same time, the external balance has reflected the weak economic conditions and also the continued import management measures and capital controls. All these have undermined confidence and investment in Pakistan's economy. The economic growth is expected to remain subdued. As a result, the poverty rate is expected to remain at around 40%. This is World Bank estimation. And about 10 million people just above the poverty line are at risk of falling into poverty in the face of shocks. So what is the solution? How Pakistan could escape its current low and unsustainable growth path? By implementing bold reforms. Reforms to improve the quality of expenditure, by reducing the poorly targeted energy and commodity subsidies, by implementing the Treasury single account, which improves the cash management of the government, and by reforming the pension system. Also, by broadening the tax base, by closing tax exemptions which are distortive to the economy, by taxing the untaxed sectors, including agriculture, retail, and real estate, and by improving compliance by simplifying the tax structure. Also, by improving the business environment and competitiveness, strengthening the private sector access to finance, which has been on a declining path over the past several years, by simplifying the business environment, by cutting red tape and by digitalization, maintaining a flexible and market-determined exchange rate, which helps Pakistani's products and export to remain competitive. Also by minimizing the distortive presence of the government in the economy, by implementing and making progress on the government's plans to reform SOEs, which my colleague will speak to it shortly, and by addressing the challenges of energy sector, continuing tariff reform to achieve cost recovery and to ensure financial sustainability of the sector, by strengthening and expanding the transmission network, and by improving supply side and demand side efficiencies, including limiting the leakages, and by using more energy efficient technology. To recap the main messages, Pakistan averted a macroeconomic crisis at the start of this fiscal year and has been stabilizing, but the stabilization is, but it has been, the economic vulnerabilities have remained high, and the current growth is not enough for Pakistan to reduce poverty and to achieve its long-term development goals. Lastly, Pakistan can escape its current low and unsustainable growth path by implementing bold reforms. With that, I go to our medium-term projections. This outlook is predicated on continued fiscal consolidation or all tight macroeconomic policies, a potential new IMF program, and continued rollovers. Also continued import management measures in the context of low foreign exchange reserves, and policy uncertainty in the absence of credible reform plan. With these assumptions, economy is expected to grow at 1.8% this fiscal year, on the back of a very strong recovery of agriculture. Over the medium term, as confidence improves, the growth is expected to recover to an average of 2.5% over the medium term. Inflation is expected to remain high this year at 26%, due to a significant increase in domestic energy prices and reflecting the high base effect. And as global prices declines, inflation is expected to moderate to 15% in fiscal 25 and 11% in fiscal 26. Limited foreign exchange reserves caused the imports to remain muted and current account deficit to remain at 0.7% of GDP this year and to further decline over the medium term to 0.6%. Fiscal deficit is expected to increase to 8% of GDP given the high interest payments. But over the medium term, as interest payments decline and as fiscal consolidation measures take hold, that is expected to gradually decline to 7.4% of GDP in fiscal year 25 and 6.6% of GDP in fiscal year 26. With continued fiscal consolidation measures, government debt is expected to decline to 73.1% this year and to 72.5% in fiscal year 26. With that, thank you. I invite my colleague, Qorat, to deliver his presentation. Thank you.
Can you hear me well? Yeah. So we can upload the presentation directly. So our today's special focus topic on the Pakistan Development Update is about the federal state-owned enterprises. The federal state-owned enterprises in Pakistan are like around 206 in number, which includes 88 commercial enterprises and 45 non-commercial state-owned enterprises. Out of the remaining are like the subsidiaries of these SOEs. The particular focus of this chapter is on the federal commercial SOEs because these federal commercial SOEs are covering almost 99% of the asset base of the total SOE portfolio, 99% of the asset and the revenue base of the total SOE portfolio. So therefore, the focus of the chapter is about the federal commercial SOEs. So the federal commercial, just to give a little context on the federal commercial SOEs, it's by definition, as per the SOE Act, it includes the companies that are registered under the Companies Act 2017, as well as it includes the authorities or the other statutory bodies that have a defined revenue stream, for example, WAPDA, and National Highway Authority as well. So the main areas where the main sectors where these federal commercial SOEs are operating are power sector, financial, and the list that is presented there on the left side of the presentation, of the slide. These federal commercial SOEs have a direct impact on the society, on the economy, and on the financial infrastructure of the country. And when I said the society, it means that, like, you can see the subsectors of the portfolio that that has an impact on the citizens of the Pakistan, as well as on the businesses in the businesses. So it includes discos, which has the power sector, and in the power sector, the discos is the major area, which is like the major subsector, which where these commercial SOE operates. Then we have roads and highways, aviation, railways, and then oil and gas marketing companies as well. So the left side of the slide shows that what is the profitability, how these SOEs perform in terms of their profitability. And we can see that the highest loss-making subsector is discos. So discos are they are almost covering like in financial year 2022, the losses from the discos is around 0.6% of the GDP. The transport sector is making around 0.4% of the losses of the 0.4% of the GDP, which is actually eating up the profit that's coming from the profitable sectors like oil and gas, which is showing the profit of around 0.5% of the GDP. So on net aggregate basis, we can see that the portfolio overall is not in profit. Though the trends are improving in terms of the losses, but like the overall profit portfolios is still showing 0.2% of the 0.2%. The losses of the 0.2% of the GDP, as you can see in the presentation in the slide here. So the impact on the financial infrastructure is huge. The annual fiscal outflow to these SOEs to cover the losses of these SOEs in the form of subsidies, loans, grants, and even in some cases, equity injection is around 2% of the GDP in financial year 2022. And you can see an increasing trend here that, this support to this to the federal SOEs is continuously rising over the period. Now, the government is not only supporting the SOEs through the on-budget support, but there is also support that is going to these federal commercial SOEs through guarantees, which allows them to to access the commercial financing from the banks, which again, as Murtaza has mentioned in his earlier presentation, that there is a limited space available for the private sector to access that finance because a lot of finance is being picked by the government here. So the availability of the guarantees has doubled over the period. It's like from the 2.2% of the GDP, it has raised to 4.5% of the GDP. The loan guarantee stock, the outstanding guarantees issued to these federal commercial SOEs, with the power sector being the largest here. And the power sector subsidies are also being the largest, and the total grants and subsidy, the on-budget support is around for the SOEs is like 1.8% in terms of grants and subsidies. The rest is loans and equity injection. And off-budget support, you can see that the outstanding guarantees are 4.5% of the GDP, which has been consistently on average 0.9% of the GDP has been issued in terms of guarantees to the federal commercial SOEs. Now, what's government earning from these SOEs? Is it a profitable business for the government to remain in this business? And this slide is clearly showing that, the annual support to the SOEs is around 2% of the GDP. The fiscal support to the SOEs is 2% of the GDP as compared to the annual fiscal returns in terms of dividends and corporate tax that has been received from these SOEs. So the returns that has been received is around 0.6% of the GDP, whereas the annual fiscal support that is being given to them is around 2% of the GDP. So there is clearly a gap between the support, between the fiscal support and fiscal return is around 1.4% of the GDP. So neither they are not gaining anything, rather they are also pouring more money to that. And the largest portion is in terms of subsidies that is given in terms for this includes, the subsidies includes the tariff differential subsidies and also the settlement of the circular debt in the power sector. So we can't say that government is not doing anything. Their government is continuously through the joint, a concerted effort from the multilateral development banks and the government are jointly in a phase of continuous reform, the foundational reforms to improve the overall portfolio. And it started from 2013, just to give you a little context in that regard, when for the first time, public sector corporate governance rules has been issued by the SECP, where the definition of the state-owned enterprises came for the first time, and also what meant by the public sector obligations, public service obligations. Then in 2016, a regular data has started being compiled by the Ministry of Finance, which has allowed us to do some sort of analysis that has been done over the period. In 2021, a triage exercise was done by the Ministry of Finance, where the SOEs has been evaluated based on the performance as well as based on their strategic purposes to the federal government. And that exercise was very interesting to, it provides a roadmap to the government in terms of it identifies which SOEs need to be privatized, which need to be restructured, or which need to be retained in their current form. In 2022, there has also been, there are certain, so Pakistan, it's very interesting, when you look into the landscape of the state-owned, federal state-owned enterprises, it also includes the SOEs, which are doing a lot of public service obligation on behalf of the government, right? So for NHA is an example for that. NHA continues running the viable projects, as well as sometimes they goes for the projects which are not that viable and do not have that returns coming from those projects. So those projects are being supported through the cash development loans. And the way those organizations are being structured, they are not running in a corporatized environment, in a corporatized fashion. So the loan stock from NHA is now 4% of the GDP, which is very high and which is actually polluting the numbers when we look into the overall loan stock from the state-owned enterprises. So there has been a dialogue by the ECNIC, and the government is continuously having these dialogues that we really need to work on the financial restructuring of the National Highway Authority, NHA. In 2023, it's an year of reforms, the legal reforms, where the State-Owned Enterprises Act was promulgated, the SOE policy was enacted, and then there was operationalization of the Central Monitoring Unit, which is basically the oversight unit that has been established within the Ministry of Finance that looks the financial performance of the financial and operational performance of the SOEs, and which would also allow the government to take timely decisions and informed decisions when they are further looking into the supporting the state-owned enterprises. So whether the expected results has been achieved from these reforms or not, so there has been a lot in paper that's going on, but the time of action is now. Because we can see just not implementing the triage, we looked into some top loss-making SOEs and not implementing the triage recommendations, we can see that an annual cost that government is undertaking on these SOEs is 0.8% of the GDP, with a considerable fiscal exposure. So now what's required is no new reform interventions, but rather just implement the reform action plans that you already have, that the government already have in place, which includes the number one, which we have been continuously mentioning in our various policy notes, that implement the SOE Triage 2021, which has categorized the assets, which has categorized the state-owned enterprises, that what fate should be taken, what path should be taken to improve the performances. Implementation of the SOE law and SOE policy, which provide a good corporate governance and business practices. NHA requires immediate financial restructuring. NHA has an asset base of 9%, which can definitely allow them to access the commercial finance from their own assets, and which can reduce government's fiscal burden as well. Adopt good financial management practices, have viable business plans by the SOEs is very important, which should be approved by their independent board of directors. The Central Monitoring Unit need to be strengthened and have been given power to actually exercise the implementation of the SOE laws in these SOEs. Government should tighten the financing review, and what it actually entails is the overdue principles and the overdue amount, the SOEs are not paying back on their loan to the government. And it's very important that when the government is extending loans, or the loans, whether that's through the cash development loans or the foreign relent loans, those need to be reviewed. The repayments should be reviewed. So there's outstanding principals as well as outstanding interest payments to the government. And last but not least is to manage fiscal risk through better and more comprehensive disclosures which includes the adherence with the international financial reporting standards, and providing guarantees, developing the rules for issuing guarantees, which can curtail the government's fiscal exposure. So I'll stop here and thank you.
Thank you, Adi, for the wonderful presentation. Here's your phone. So taking on from Adi, that's the problem. We are not saying the government is not doing anything. We are saying it is doing too many things and inefficiently. It's acting like as a benevolent king taking care of everybody, giving bailout packages leading to the fall of empire. Now we would just skip the Q&A session for this presentation, which was allocated for these presentations, and we would skip to the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Moritz Mayer, senior economist at the World Bank. I'll hand over the stage to him to introduce the panelists and take over.
Good evening, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be part of this event today to moderate the panel discussion following the presentation by my colleagues on the general economic situation and our deep dive on state-owned enterprises. Let me welcome our three panelists. Afia Malik, one of them. Afia Malik is a senior research economist working with the Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Afia has worked a lot on the energy sector, including her most recent book on the power sector, an enigma with no easy solution. While we are doing arrangements on the stage, let me also welcome Khurram Hussain, who is a business and economy journalist and analyst. I'm sure many of you know him from his writings in The Dawn. Welcome, Khurram. And finally, Zobia Khurram, who is a professor of administrative science at the University of Punjab. Zobia has recently worked on governance, social media, public policy research, and organizational studies. So while the panel is getting on the stage, I would like to remind the audience that we're going to have first a general panel discussion on focusing on the state of the economy and then diving into state-owned enterprises. And afterwards, we are calling upon you to ask your questions. Our colleague Saddam has highlighted earlier that we're using the Slido application, and we would like to encourage you to share with us your questions for the discussion later on. Let me also highlight that we will finish before iftar, so a tough program ahead of us. So thanks for joining me on stage. We have seen the presentation earlier on, and I would propose we go directly into the substance to talk about the general state of the economy. The medium-term outlook of the PDU highlights that in the near future, high interest payments and fiscal consolidation will continue to limit government spending. Economic growth will need to be driven by private sector growth. So, looking towards one of our panelists, specialists in the sector, Dr. Afia, which reforms would support private sector-led growth, and how can the government improve the enabling environment for firms to grow? Over to you.
Sorry. Yeah, you are right. Private sector-led growth is the way to go for Pakistan. PIDE has done a lot of research on the reforms which are required for the private sector to grow. I'll mention here 3 or 4 important areas which need reforms. So the first area which I will talk about is regulation. Pakistan economy is over-regulated, having a substantial compliance cost for businesses. So the first reform which is required is to undo the cumbersome and redundant regulations which are hindering the growth in the private sector firms. Second area which needs reforms is the tax sector. Instead of running after the tax to GDP ratio, what is required is to have a simplified tax system based on the principles of efficiency, fairness, consistency, and convenience. Digitization, low tax rates, but covering all types of income categories, and as well as some sort of adjustment in the corporate income tax and reduction in the and less reliance on the indirect taxes. Third area which needs reforms is to have a developed stock market, and for the developed stock market, what is required basically is a simplified and a transparent regulatory framework, streamlining and modernization of the IPO procedures, risk-sharing arrangements, as well as portfolio diversification. And finally, what requires is an openness. Instead of protection, providing subsidies or tax rebates, let the firms grow, compete and grow. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a great start to think about the important role of the private sector. And I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about households. We have seen from the PDU that over the last couple of years, frequent and profound shocks have stalled poverty reduction. And moreover, we do see that human capital gaps persist. If I may ask our second panelist, Sobia, which policies could support higher income among households, and how can the government address long-standing human capital deficits?
Thank you, Moritz, for your question. While I was looking to the presentation also, poverty reduction has really stalled in Pakistan, with the poverty rate stagnated at around 40%, and a growth rate for the year 2024 expected to be at only 1.8%. Now, we know that we have high inflation, and there has been reduced wage growth, high energy prices, even higher transportation costs in the rural sector. So I'll be focusing on three different policy areas on which we can focus on. First and foremost, obviously, private sector-led growth, in which we let the private sector lead to growth and assume a bigger role in provision of employment and jobs. Government of Pakistan needs to stop being the biggest provider of jobs and employment in the country. And the case in point would be the three top cases of loss-making state-owned enterprises of PIA, Pakistan Steel Mill, and Railways. The second policy idea could be increased public investments in to improve human development outcomes, and that could be in focus areas to remove child stunting, to decrease it at least, to improve the worsening educational outcomes. Pakistan has to improve targeted subsidies, as we've done in a BISP or SARS program. We need to make them more robust so that the poorest of the poor, they can sail through this period of economic crisis. And third, both of these policy prescriptions, they were more about rationalization of the expenditures. The third one has to be about improving our taxation. And I would like to point how, I just kept thinking, how can we make our taxation more pro-poor, so to say? We have to broaden our tax base, but we not only have to do that by reforming the personal income tax, we have to target the harder to tax sectors such as agriculture, property, and retail. Now, the salaried class, I was just going through a report, it has already paid more than 250% of what the total exporters in our country have paid at the rate of 1%, which is a subsidized rate. Salaried class has their taxes withheld at source, which is a convenient way of collecting taxes. So we have to move towards more direct taxation rather than indirect taxation, which is more regressive for the poor. And in order to do that, we have to increase our focus on broadening our tax base by focusing on the property, retail, and agriculture rather than only reforming personal income tax. So in a nutshell, if I quickly summarize, we have to pursue these contradictory sort of outcomes. On one side, we want to control the fiscal costs, and on the other side, we would also like to spend, but they are better targeted subsidies. So improved private sector role through SOE reform, improved taxation and sort of make it more pro-poor, and third, obviously, improved targeted subsidies for the poorest of the poor.
Thanks so much for giving us some insights on how to think about households. Already at this point, I'm very much seeing how you are highlighting, Afia, earlier, the role of the private sector. We just talked a little bit about the role of the private sector for labor markets and labor incomes. So it seems to be an evolving topic we need to keep an eye on. So taking a forward-looking perspective, the PDU includes a positive outlook for economic growth, yet with only limited buffers. What can the government do to strengthen confidence among households, firms, domestic and international investors to stabilize growth? May I ask Khurram to come in on this question, please?
Okay, sure. I think the one thing the government can do is don't make any drastic changes to the course that has already been set. More than the deficits and the adverse macroeconomic circumstances themselves, what actually hurts confidence is the volatility. It's the sharp swings when things go from looking one way in 1 month and looking the opposite 3 months later and then back. That doesn't help in any way. And over the past 3 years, and the report notes that the economy is now emerging from a period of extreme volatility, and a sense is now beginning to settle in that this time it's for real. This time, because we've seen false starts along the way. But this time it seems to be for real. And so long as I think the pain itself can be managed, especially at the level of the firms, at the level of households, I think some support is going to be required. And I think there the government has a role to play. But managing the pain is makes a lot more sense than trying to manage the volatility itself for the government. So I think what can the government do? They can stick to the path of stabilization that they are on currently. They can not make changes to the finance team midstream. Okay, that's very important. That's something that has been done on numerous occasions through this period of volatility, and it has not served the purposes of whatever government was in power when at that point in time. Don't try and resort to artificial means to try and bring down the level of pain in the economy, but seek a more convincing path to drain the volatility of its main drivers. That's the long path. That's the hard road to take. They're on that hard road. They've put a lot of sacrifice has been made to bring things to this point. I think sticking to this for the next for the foreseeable future at least, is probably the single most important thing the government can do.
Khurram, thanks so much for these reflections. And you highlighted earlier on that the state has a role to play. We have earlier seen a presentation on state-owned enterprises, and I want to dive directly into this topic with our second round of questions. This time starting with Sylvia. One reform to reduce fiscal risks and revive private sector-led growth would be the privatization of state-owned enterprises. Thinking about this reform agenda, what are the opportunities for reducing the footprint of state-owned enterprises?
Thank you, Moritz. I'll start with some numbers here. The federal government support for the state-owned enterprises, it stood at around 2% of the GDP. While the same federal government's total expenditure to healthcare was at around 1.4%. So that just gives us an idea of the scale of support which has been extended to SOEs at the moment. Government of Pakistan also has a very large SOE portfolio, 206 entities. I was listening to the presentation, and with 88 of them being the commercial entities. If the government is to reform or privatize top 14 of its loss-making entities, it would generate around 0.8% of the GDP. If we look at some literature, developing country literature on reforming or managing state-owned enterprises, it talks about having a robust legal framework for their management and also their improved corporate governance and oversight. Now, if we look at the government of Pakistan through its Ministry of Finance, it has undergone a triage 2021 exercise already. We recently also have had a State-Owned Enterprises Governance and Operations Act of 2023, which is accompanied by SOE Management and Ownership Policy of 2023. Now we have that, we have the framework. We've done the exercise, we've made the act, we have an accompanying policy. Now what's next? We need to improve private sector's involvement and how we can do that? We can do that by privatizing the state-owned enterprises which are operating in the commercial sector. Now, through the Triage 2021 exercise, Government of Pakistan itself has labeled them into either non-essential or non-strategic assets or essential or strategic assets. Now, the non-essential or the non-strategic assets, they can be dealt with corporate restructuring, management contracts, joint ventures. We all know that, public-private partnership, even listing on stock exchanges. The essential or the strategic state-owned enterprises, they could be dealt with management contracts or some other tools, some other tools. Now, while we will be doing that, what we'll need is we will need the support of the political leadership, we'll need the support of the civil society, support from the trade unions, the chambers of commerce, any industry associations that we have. And keeping in mind that we have such a large SOE portfolio, any reform or privatization is not going to happen overnight. It is not even going to happen in the short term. So what are we going to do? What the government of Pakistan needs to do is that it has already enacted an act and it has a policy. It has to adopt and actually implement the act and the policy to improve the functioning of these state-owned enterprises while
on the state-owned enterprise front. And I say deep-rooted because it tends to remain in place even as governments come and go. And that thinking basically says that business as usual is better than trying experiments or trying to change things. It's a thinking that says if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And it's generally averse to change that may be disruptive. Disruptive internally of a certain harmony within the state, within the various organs of state, between the party, the ruling party and the opposition, between civil, military, etc., etc., etc. So it's a fear of disruption where the outcome itself may be indeterminate. They're not certain whether the outcome will even materialize, that you invest in the disruption and you're not sure whether you will even get the outcome that you are aiming for, or that the outcome will be a good one and will deliver the benefits that you are thinking it will, and will be perceived and seen by others to deliver those benefits. So then the thinking is just let it be. Yes, it's costing us a little bit here and there, but it's better than undertaking such a risky move in its place. This is the reason why we've had the first reform of at least the 2010 decades. I mean, we can take the story back to 1991 when the privatization began. But we've had the private boards of governors brought in. We've had, and then more recently, the triage exercise in 2021, and then a few others in between this time period. And yet the accumulated losses of these enterprises have increased. Yet the fiscal, the absolute size of the fiscal, of the subsidies and the fiscal weight that they represent has increased stupendously, as Purutalayan's presentation showed us in such stark terms. I was struck that National Highway Authority loans are 4% of GDP. That's stupendous. But even understanding that some of these entities are not meant to be profit-making, they are meant to be loss-making, that's fine. But some are meant to be profit-making. You know, if you look at the stupendous growth of PIA's losses, from 2006, when they, I think, reported their first loss till now. It's mind-boggling how this entity has remained on the books since then. So what has kept it there is a mindset that says, keep it because trying to get rid of it carries too much risk for us. But also at the same time, governments, so long as they had access to financing, external financing, including from their multilateral partners, then the incentive to actually do something, to take action, was not there. They actually started to move finally when they are told, no action, no money. Right. That is when we start seeing them actually start to undertake action. And I think towards that end, it's a blessing in disguise at this point in time that we have a government with a fresh mandate. However embattled that mandate may be, it's up to them now to live up to the kind of expectations that the electorate must be placing upon them. On the back of that, there's also this unequivocal message that is coming to this government: no action, no money. And I think we are now seeing the results of that. That they are now saying by June 2024. PIA's privatization will be completed. 14 years perhaps too late, but it's happening nonetheless. I think building on that momentum going forward, there's a lot to build on with that momentum that's going to be here in this fiscal year.
Thanks so much, Khurram, for reminding us about the complicated political economy, which clearly illustrates that this process will take time, and that as part of this process, there's also a possibility that some SOEs might be privatized rather sooner than later, whereas others will stay within the state for a longer period. That brings me to a last question. Thinking about the path forward, we do see that very likely some of the SOEs will remain part of the economic landscape, at least in the short and medium term. Afia, I would be very interested in your reflections, how the government can enhance the performance, efficiency, and governance of these SOEs.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk specifically about the power sector, these distribution companies discourse. The first thing which needs to be done is to keep the politics away from their affairs. Decentralize power to these companies, let them decide all their administrative, managerial, and financial affairs. Let them decide how to manage their affairs in all these three affairs. Secondly, you are right that outright privatization for these would be difficult, but some sort of private sector involvement is necessary. So mandatory listing of these companies in the stock exchange is required, but with the limit of 5% share for each shareholder so that no one can monopolize the business. So instead of transferring a monopoly from the government to some other private entity, let different shareholders control the business. There is an option of institutional investor as well, pension funds or institutional investors. Secondly, for better administration, what is required is to divide these distribution companies into smaller units for better administration. And so in the first case, horizontally for better administration, and at the second stage, vertically for ensuring some sort of competition in the retail sector. For better corporate management, they must have an independent boards, not only on papers, but in the real sense. These independent boards must have power to take decisions without the influence of bureaucracy as well as politicians. So independent boards comprising of professionals or technocrats who know about the power sector, or if we are talking about the gas sector, they know about the gas sector. They have the knowledge of those sectors. And these independent boards decide about the management. They appoint management on merit. Yeah. And these boards will appoint, I think this.
Colleagues, any solutions?
Is this one is working? Yeah. So the independent boards will appoint senior management on merit and give them the target, as well as target, and also hold them accountable for their decisions. If they don't achieve the target, they must be held accountable for all their decisions. And one more thing, we always talk about theft, inefficiencies, losses, recoveries. This sector must move towards technology adoption. Automated metering infrastructure is adopted worldwide, so why not in Pakistan? And final comment, we always talk about management inefficiencies, all this, but we never talk about the policy. Policy is also playing a significant role behind the inefficiencies of these companies. For instance, the policy of uniform tariff across discos. It acts as a disincentive for the inefficient distribution companies to improve their efficiency. So this type of policies must be revised and abolished. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing these reflections with a particular focus on the power sector, where all of us know that the discos at this very moment become like a fiscal risk, but also a challenge for overall provision of services. This is an opportunity now for you to ask your questions. We are looking forward to learn more about your interest, let it be in the general economy or in the topic of state-owned enterprises. And I'm calling upon my team, which promised me to put questions on the screen. So let's see where we're heading. And there we go. So a question which is very much focused to Dr. Sobia. I'm going to read it out. Suppose we need to prioritize 3 things for stability of the economy. What those should be?
I think I've already, didn't I already address that? I don't know if they would want me to explain it further. I'm going to repeat myself, I think. In order to stabilize, as far as our focus and topic today is concerned, improve private sector participation through SOE reform, Obviously, poorest of the poor needs to be protected through targeted subsidies. And thirdly, improve our tech system more robust by focusing on hard-to-tech sectors, which includes property, retail, and agriculture.
Thanks so much. I very much like your concise and precise thinking about it. And I would like to give my colleagues, Afia and Kuram, an opportunity to touch upon the same issue, your 3 priorities. Very much to the point before we move to the next question. What do you see?
Listen, I'm an analyst, I'm a journalist, I'm somebody who writes for a larger public, and my priorities will naturally derive from that position that I hold. I think one thing that is absolutely vital, and frankly, if I may say, without which there is not going to be any lasting stability, is enhanced transparency in the operations of government, especially where economic management is concerned. I can't begin to tell you, as a journalist, as an analyst, how vast areas of the government operate in the dark, completely. If I were to tell you, for example, we see every month the newspapers reporting the revenue collection figure for that month. If I were to tell you how that figure is actually collected, because I've been a business editor of a major newspaper and been in charge of the reporters who bring those figures in. If I were to tell you how that figure actually comes in, you will lose your credulity in data, in numbers. So it's very important that if we are to talk of tax reform, for example, it's not really going to happen. We can talk and have all the best roadmaps in place, but it's not going to happen so long as the FPR is not mandated by law to release specific data as per specific definitions regarding revenue collections as per specific schedule. Every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it may be. How much collected under what head, et cetera, et cetera. And likewise with the power division. We are not really going to address the circular debt if the power division continues operating in the dark. We need a very, very rigorous disclosure template to be in place that is legally binding upon these people to release the data connected with their operations, with their finances, with everything else. And that then sets into motion a series of other behaviors that culminate in, or that will resonate with the reforms coming top down. So I think that's a very important thing that needs to happen.
Okay. I'll agree with Quorum, transparency, data sharing, and one final comment, consistency of policy. These 3 things are required for stability in the economy.
Thank you very much. Let's move to the next question, which is directed towards Dr. Afia. We have been talking of privatization of discourse since long time, since 1999. What is the plan to proceed with that? Maybe start with 1 or 2 discos. You have focused early on the power sector, and not all 10 at once.
Yeah, outright, I said earlier also, outright privatization will not help. The dynamics in which these distribution companies are working is very different from other enterprises. So that's why I suggest what I said, what we have proved in our research at PIDE also. Privatization, involvement of private sector through the stock exchange by mandatory listing of these companies in the stock exchange with a limit of 5% share for each shareholder. That's the way to go for these distribution companies, and eventually with the passage of time the private sector will be involved in these distribution companies instead of outright selling their assets to some 1 or 2 private entities, to major companies. Yeah.
Can I add a thought to that? I mean, the idea is obviously a good one, but in order for that to succeed, the distribution company in question is going to have to submit its financial statements to a recognized auditor, first of all. They will need a professional chief financial officer to produce their financial statements, and then have those audited before they can even be brought to the stock exchange. And that brings us back to the transparency part, right? Before any investor is going to agree to acquire stakes in this, they will need credible data and an insight into the financial state of affairs within the distribution company. Without that, no one will know what exactly it is that they are buying.
And if I understand correctly, you're also seeing this transparency, this governance, as a pre-requirement for the private sector to be interested in participating in this privatization of state-owned enterprises. I think we have time for one more question, maybe, or not. Yes, one more question. How can Pakistan implement tough reforms in the current political environment? Isn't this a great way of closing also our panel today? Khurram, over to you.
I think the path of tough reforms opens up only when all the other paths are closed off. Tough reforms needed to have begun as far back as the year 2000, I think. And there was and they have been in fits and starts since then. But I think if for a quarter century we have been floundering, trying different things, what is the one constant that ensured that those efforts do not really break out into any meaningful outcome? And that constant is the constant flow of financing from abroad. And so long as those taps were open, the other doors were open, and the tough road of reform could be avoided. So I think in this difficult political environment, one of the blessings in disguise is the fact that there is only one path forward for this government now. And I think there is recognition of this. They have by now realized this sufficiently. And we've now seen that it's taken, I mean, if we take it at face value, what they are saying that by June PIA will be privatized, notice it took them 1 year. 1 year. And PIA privatized, I think it was placed on the privatization list when, in 2002? Am I right, Ijaz? 2001, 2, I think, when the list was drawn up. And finally, when the doors are all closed and only one door is left open, it takes them 1 year. That's how much of, I mean, that's how not big of a problem it really was in reality, right? Making it seem like a big deal was just sort of volubility in the past. It wasn't really, it was excuses to avoid the hard road of reform.
Thanks so much, Khurram. That brings us directly to one of the questions to the audience. You see our poll in here. We have learned about the challenges. We have learned about the opportunities. Where do you see the economy heading? We would be very much interested in your views. So please use this as an opportunity to participate in our poll. We seem to come to an end. We are approaching Iftar very soon. I'm very much looking forward to spend Iftar with this group today. And I would like to ask our audience to thank this excellent panel for great discussion and insightful views. Thanks so much. Let me hand over the floor to our colleague Saddam, who is going to lead you to the rest of the day.
Thank you. There's nothing much of the day. While going through the presentation, that reminded me of a movie about, yeah, let me hear to them first.
Maybe, okay, now it's going to respond. Yeah, it's gone. That's fine.
You're going to finish it?
It's fine.
So while the proceedings, I was just, my mind, there was a movie name popping up about the Prophet Moses, the gods and the kings. So what we have here now in our country, the gods and the kings, and common man is missing. Where's the common man? He's too happy, and then he's happy about being happy. So we need to really reassess the social fabric of our nation and country to kickstart the reforms and to mend ourselves and to, reform ourselves even in the first place, and then we can reform the system. So with this hope that we are a resilient nation, too much resilience is also a bad thing happening now, I guess. Too much resilience is hurting us now. but we are resilient. So we have seen harder times. We'll endure this time too. So with this hope, let me conclude and call you on to the iftar. Enjoy the iftar and goodbye. Thank you.